Aș vrea să-l invit pentru ultima prezentare din acest slot pe reprezentantul companiei Elsevier, domnul Taha. Pentru a susține o prezentare, poate mai mult sau mai puțin în legătură cu ce s-a prezentat până acum, însă dumnealui este expert în identificarea necesităților pentru dezvoltarea produselor Elsevier. Said, please.
So, thanks a lot for inviting me here. My name is Taha. I am the Vice President for Research Management in Elsevier. It's my first time to visit Romania. I still have, hopefully, a couple of hours tomorrow to see and watch the beauty of this country. I've traveled a lot in Eastern Europe. I have a lot of interest in the academic world generally, but specifically today, I would like to make a little bit of contribution to informing you how good you are doing and how can we help make the progress in the academic world in Romania even better. So I'll start quickly just talking about what we all face these days. Science is not like what it used to be. I remember I'm a pharmacist by education. So I remember when I started studying pharmacy, it was all about chemistry. These days, it's not like that anymore. You cannot address something like climate change by studying pharmacy or climate change. It is a multidisciplinary world of science. And not only that, the academic world is getting more complex, it's also getting more competitive. This is a small way of showing you how competitive it is. In the last year, in 2015, $1.9 trillion were spent on R&D globally. What I found very interesting is the changes in that dynamic. South Korea has now exceeded every single country in Europe when it comes to the level of expenditure on R&D, only beaten by Germany in Europe, with the difference in size, as you can imagine. India now has moved into being the 6th biggest R&D spender in the world. And the US is now spending nearly 25% of the world's R&D expenditure. While if you add China and the US together, this is half of the world's expenditure on R&D. And you can see here that Romania is around here, with around 0.38% of the GDP being spent on R&D. That's around $1.5 billion. Is that good or bad? Allow me to show you in a couple of seconds. But before I do that, I just want to tell you why I believe that we are in a position to help identify in Elsevier the strength and points of opportunities in any academic research environment. With Elsevier, we have a brilliant vantage point, right? So I won't speak too much on that. We have, most of you here know the resources we have from a data perspective, Science Direct, Scopus. The data that we acquire on annual basis is intense. We have terabytes of data. And we can, and we have applied to the earlier discussion, a lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence on top of this data to show what I'm going to show you today. We have developed tools and materials that have never been superseded before. We have what we call HPCCs that are working the data, and they are high performance computer cluster computing, which is what we call in normal words as supercomputers. This is some of the data that we have, right? So we have data on funding, we have data on usage that nobody else has. How do you use Scopus? How do you use Science Direct? What are the trends there? What can we conclude from that? We have submissions, we have patents, we have documents, we have affiliation data, addresses, and so on. I won't, again, spend too much time on this because I would like to spend as much time as I can telling you about you. The normal products that we have are categorized in 4 groups. So the products names are SciVal, which is most of what I'm going to share with you is coming from SciVal today. And this is where we apply most of our HPCC, artificial intelligence technology, machine learning, and data sciences. Then we have Pure, which is a profile analyzing tool for each researcher. And we have, of course, our analytical services. And the most important is Scopus, where all this data is being built. Scopus is the largest citation database in the world. So to start with Scopus, just briefly, Scopus has more or less twice the coverage in average of any of our closest competitor in the world. So we cover and we expose more citations, more articles than anybody else in the world. And this is just a small verification of that. The world has started moving away from looking at only the US and Europe as the sources and the powerhouses of science. China is way more represented in Scopus than any other place. But Eastern Europe, Africa, the BRICS, Brazil. So you see here a very brief coverage of how the data is represented. And you see that there is a 250% higher number of citations on our side for Eastern Europe alone. And I will show you again in a second how that represents. SciVal is an analysis tool that can get a lot of insights from the data. And I won't speak about SciVal too much. I will actually show you most of the discussions on SciVal. And this is how we represent researchers. This is a tool that is now done by the Texas system in the US, where we have profiled all the researchers in a technology that we call the Fingerprint technology. Again, another machine learning technology that is based on NLP, natural language processing, that analyzes text and is able to look at concepts from the text and draw a fingerprint for a person or a university out of that. Again, this is just a small network to show you how that works. We can give literally in a second. This is a public website that I would actually advise you to visit and play with the data a little bit. And again, this is why I mentioned most of the global big players in the world of research intelligence are now working with Elsevier. Times Higher Education rankings, QS rankings, Shanghai rankings, Maclean's, Wall Street Journal, which was just announced a week ago, Financial Times, US News, you name it. The NSF, after working with 40 years with our competitors' data, just moved away from that 2 years ago because it is about representation of the world science. The UK, Australia, Italy, I can go on for a long time to tell you that most of the big powerhouses of science in the world have now understood that breadth and depth are most important, and they are represented in Scopus. These are some other examples other than rankers: OECD, the World Bank, Royal Society, NRF in Korea, MEXT in Japan, and so on. This is the report that we produce every 2 years for the UK, just to confirm. This is what bases the UK strategy on. So it's the analysis that we make on their behalf because of, again, our coverage from a breadth and a depth perspective. And I will show you some of the analysis and how it applies to Romania today. This is a very interesting one. I always like to show this one. This has nothing to do with science, and it has everything to do with science. So Amsterdam, as a city, wants to attract people who build skyscrapers. Nothing to do with science, right? But if somebody wants to build a skyscraper, he invests between $10 to $20 billion in a long-term project. It's a lot of money. If you want to go to Amsterdam to build your skyscraper, you need to make sure that this is a city that has all the aspects of 100% survival. Science is core to this. So what Amsterdam asked us to do is to tell them how strong they are as a city from a scientific perspective, so that they can showcase their strength from a scientific perspective to those who are going to build these skyscrapers. Quite an interesting concept, and they came to us for that. But now let's look at Romania and Eastern Europe, and generally Europe. I just mentioned when we started that Romania is now spending around $1.5 billion in actual funding on research, and that represents quite a small amount of the GDP. That's about 0.38%. I'm sorry, I'm going to use the laser only on one screen, but this is what you see here as a number. What I don't think you know is how efficient, how brilliant you are actually using that money. So it is one of the lowest. You are the 44th country in the world when it comes to the amount of money that you send, but you are nearly one of the highest 3 countries in Europe when it comes to the efficiency of how you do that. So if you look at the numbers, which is the red light on the right-hand side here, this is the number of citations you receive per millions of dollars spent. So for each $1 million you spend, how many citations do you get? As you can see, and this is a small example, if you look at the first line, Turkey, as an example, spends 10 times what you spend, $15 billion. While you actually, for each $1 million, you get 3 times the citations. For every dollar, you do 3 times better than Turkey. But it goes on. You are better than Israel, exactly the same, 3 times. Poland, 1.5 times. Malaysia, and so on and so forth. The only country that I see here that is actually, sort of like competing with you is Serbia and Croatia. So again, going back to this part of the world, it's very interesting to see that the pressure from a funding perspective somewhat yields when there is the will from a researcher perspective to achieve, to do better. But that's not really the whole answer, right? You can, as a research community, do your best with the money you have. But you also need to make sure that you showcase the strength of that research. Because only by addressing research as an investment, not a cost, that you will make your case about how good you are doing. You are really doing a great job. And you should be proud, in my view, of how good that is. But you also need to get the evidence to showcase how if you get more, you will do even better. So this is a small example, right? You produce 71,000 articles, or produced 71,000 articles between 2011 and 2015. I will try to spend a little bit on this. This number that you see here, which is the 0.78 number, this is what we call field-weighted citation. And this is a normalized quality metric. It means I can compare mathematics to nuclear physics by looking at this number because it's normalized for each field. So we look at the average citations for that field, and then based on that, we take that number and we normalize it for each and every field. Which means that the average of the world is 1. So despite that very high success rate and efficiency that you're bringing in, your field-weighted citation impact is below the average of the world. So it's 0.78 compared to 1. So you're 20% below the average. And you are very strong, of course, in computer science, mathematics, and engineering. So how can we make that better? And is it important to make it better? So this is Czech Republic, as an example. Czech is half the population. They spend more or less twice what you do on R&D. They produce only 30% more. So you produce 70,000, they produce 100,000. The quality on their side, despite that, is only 20% higher. So you are at 0.8 more or less, and they are at 1.1. So your quality is still quite good. If you manage to get and make your case to get a little bit more funding, your case will be much better. So how can you do that? And is it really about only funding? I'll tell you in a couple of conclusions how data can be interpreted. I'm not going to interpret the data for you from now on. I'll let you look at the data and you tell me what do you see from that. This is the last example because it was important. Czech produces 100,000, you produce 70. Turkey, they spend 10 times like you do, but they only produce 3 times more than you do. And their quality is actually lower than you. So it's a very nice comparison, right? You see that it is not only about the quantity, but it is also not only about the quality. It's the mix and the balance between these two. On all aspects, you are doing better than Turkey. They spend 10 times more, they get same quality, and they are only 3 times better in quality, in quantity. Quite an interesting data point when you discuss that with your funding agencies. You're doing a very good job. I decided to compare you with Malaysia just to get outside of the region a little bit. And I found this very interesting. In the year 2010, you and Malaysia were both growing significantly when it comes to the output, the quantity. So you were equal and growing at the same rate. But as of the year 2010, Malaysia started even getting stronger performance from a quantity perspective. That, in my view, is related to the amount of funding they get, because it's about quantity. You need to fund more research. So from a first aspect perspective, you are doing great with what you have, but the case needs to be made that you need a little bit more from a financing perspective, because if you increase the quality, it balances out with the quality, with the quantity. This is the second one, which talks about the field-weighted citation impact. So yes, Malaysia did do better than you because they received more funding. Having said that, they did not do any better with regards to quality. So it depends on the researchers, the motivations, and the quality of science that is in the country that can actually impact that. But also on the collaboration aspect. How good are you in choosing your collaborators? So I'll move on to the collaboration aspect and how can you even do better without having extra money? How can you work on the quality aspect without having more money? And I'll give you a couple of examples. But I just want you to remember these two examples with Malaysia. They got better than you with regards to quantity. They didn't manage to get better than you with regards to quality. And the reason on the quantity side is because of the extra funding. This is how you collaborate across the world. The biggest collaborator with Romania across the world is France. Second to that is Germany. Third to that is the United States. I did this research 2 a.m. in the morning yesterday. So just for you to understand, first of all, the power of the tool, because it took me around 30 minutes to come up with all these analyses. But secondly, I found it very interesting that it took me up until 4 o'clock in the morning because I actually continued to ask myself, what is going on here? This is a very unique profile. And I will show you two things why I found, I work with governments across the world on research, and you are really unique. The first reason why you're unique is that naturally, the US is the first collaborator with any country I've worked with. Here they come as third. Secondly, China is not in your top 10 at all. Very, very interesting. So I said, wait a minute, I want to know what's happening here. So I did this. It took me more. So I hope you follow the numbers. What I did here is what we call in the US fantasy football. I just tried to analyze what would you do better if you worked with somebody else compared to what you are now doing. So currently we said you are doing great collaboration with France, Germany, the US, and then I added China. So the number you see, and I start with the yellow numbers. So the number you see is France, which is the first here. So this is France. I'm assuming it will be on this side of the screen. And if you see France, let me first, start with the most important number in this discussion. Your number, again, field-weighted citation impact, is 20% below the world average. So your number is 0.79. Please remember that number, right? 0.79. If you look at France, their number is 1.35. So they are 30% higher than the world. So what I did look at is, what about the papers, the collaborated papers, the documentations that where you and France had authors on the same publication? What is the field-weighted citation for that? And it was very interesting. For France, you see the number here, it's 2, more or less. Meaning, you grow from 0.7 or 0.8 to 2 if you collaborate with France as an average quality metric. So your quality more or less doubles. France gets around 80% better. So they move from 1.3 to 2. You are both winning. That's nice, right? So the quality of the papers worked between you and France are better than both sides. By a factor for you, and I will focus on Romania now, the factor is around 2. So you grow by your second player, the factor is 2.36. So you go from 0.7 to 2.3. So it's a factor of 3, let's say, right? You go from 0.8 to around 2.4. For them, they go from 1.4 to 2.4. Also a nice game. But the interesting thing is that Germany is your second collaborator While this tells you that you actually win 30% more by working with Germany instead of France. So I took this one step further. So let's look at the US. The US says is the impact is around 2.4. So close to Germany. So good, not bad at all. When I looked at China, your actual co-authored papers with them is 3.2. For you, that's a factor of, I'm very bad in mathematics. So that's probably a factor of 4. Comparing that to France, which is a factor of 2, you would double the quality of your research by doing nothing but working a little bit more with China, as an example. This is only an example of what the data can tell you, right? But it tells you how you can inform your policy. You can raise your game by just working a little bit more with somebody who actually benefits both of you. The last point here is what we have also analyzed is what we call usage. So citations, which is what I'm assessing here, is based on the research that was published 5 years ago. So now we look at the citations. What we have developed in Elsevier as a new tool is to look at readership. So citations is a lagging indicator, as we call it, while readership is something that tells you how is your publication being read? How good are they from a quality perspective to attract being read? And I will show you the same correlation for China only. So for France, the multiplier is 3. For Germany, the multiplier is 3. For the US is the multiplier 3.5. And for China, the multiplier is 6.6. So your articles are read 6 times more than the normal if you work with China. So it's exactly correlating not only to citations, but this is what we call a forecasting indicator. This tells you it's not yet cited. Your work today with China is not yet cited. It will be cited. And how do we prove that? Because it's being read. And the correlation coefficient between readership and citations has been proven. So I move on. You have a lot of heritage when it comes to immigrating scientists. This is one. This is a second. So the last slide I wanted to show you was a slide that interested me. So what else can you do regarding quality? This is what you can do regarding quality. This is what we call a brain circulation map. This is the second point I promised you about being unique as a country. It's very complicated. I won't go through it. It's simply saying there are 6 categories of scientists in and out of a country. Romanians leaving forever, Romanians leaving for more than 2 years, Romanians leaving for less than 2 years. And then the second 3 is non-Romanians moving forever into Romania, non-Romanians moving for more than 2 years into Romania, and non-Romanians moving for less than 2 years in Romania. What I found unbelievably unique about your country is the fact that 24%, actually to be more accurate, if I combine the transitionary group, which is people who worked collaboratively for less than 2 years, leaving Romania, who are Romanians leaving Romania for less than 2 years, and non-Romanians coming into Romania for less than 2 years, 33% of all the scientific publications out of Romania is in this category. It's the researchers who go out and then come back in a period of less than 2 years. This is fascinating. More fascinating is that the quality of the research done by this group is 3 times your average. The field-weighted citation of that group is 2.75. So this is another item that you need to think about. I was having discussions over the last 2 days to try to understand how is this happening, because in the rest of the world, I show you Turkey, this doesn't increase, it's not more than 10%. If you look at even China, it's around 7%. You have 33%. And they told me that Romania is so successful in tapping into European funds, so other researchers around the world within Europe are coming to work with you because they want part of that fund. And you are doing exactly the same. your researchers are so smart in looking and following the money when it comes from Europe that they are capable of doing that. So they work on projects, but not long-term ones. And the quality of that group that works after, that goes after the European funding is quite successful. They triple your quality. Nothing here about adding additional funds, but everything I saw here tells me that the level of motivation, the culture of science, the heritage that you have is something that you should really be proud of. And I'm going to be very happy to supply any sort of data that supports your case towards your governments so that you can actually get some extra funding on that. I stop here. I just want to show you that there are loads of other technologies that we have and we are capable of applying on data to tell you way more than I told you today about your science. So I hope that if the opportunity comes, please ask me questions. This is my email. Please send me whatever questions I can answer, hopefully, and it will be my pleasure to continue with that after the discussion. Thank you very much.